Howdy boys and girls, welcome to Deep Dive in Gaming Realism Part 5, where we're looking at the role of footwork as it pertains to movement controllers and stuff like that. So I figure we're going to kick this thing off with kind of have some fun with a little montage I put together. Let's take a look.
It's not just this, right? But I have something that I'm moving, right? It'll be these big kind of motions like this, right? Again, very much kind of dance-ish, right?
Yeah, cool. So little island music never hurt anyone, eh? But let's keep going with this. We'll see. We'll unpack how this plays out. It all looks good on camera. Let's see how it plays out in a game. Now, the first thing I want us to kind of think of is if you go back, maybe you were in grade school or something, and you learned about like geometry, coordinate geometry, right? Where you have X, Y, and then a Z for 3D. Well, that grade school math stuff drives a lot of the stuff that goes on behind the scenes in a video game. So, as you know, like you have points in space, right? It's the same exact thing that kind of goes on here. Is if we look at like this. This is I just threw this in Unity real quick. They call this in Unity a collider. Is kind of what I'm using here just to kind of show a capsule. And this is kind of this capsule, even though it has like a volume, it has a surface area, it has a scaling, right? The actual position of it by the game engine gets reduced down to a single point, right? So you've got, you see here, you've got X, Y, and Z, X, Y, and Z coordinates. And then what you have is, obviously we don't see the pill, right? The little collider, that all gets hidden. And in its place, kind of gets, you can call it maybe attached is a good word to use. You attach a player model. And this is me kind of doing a makeshift, pretend this is different poses, right? As the guy steps, he goes through different animations, right? That's kind of what we see. But it's all kind of this really cool and elaborate illusion that's draped on top of the pill. That's draped on top of the pill. Okay, I want you to see the pill comes first and everything else is draped on top of it, right?
So
I'll put the link to this. I'll put the link to this here down in the description. This is a really cool talk a guy gave at GDC a long time ago about a game called Overgrowth. Sorry, let me back it up a little bit. And this is kind of showing in action what I was trying to describe right there.
And we do the animation on top of that. We can make sure that that's...
You see how it starts with this collider, this little orb, and then he puts in the actual character model.
But I'm not making
and then he kind of animates little keyframes, right, just to get himself going.
So I just added these two.
And then as it keeps going, everything kind of gets blended in, right, into different different poses, different postures, different actions the player can do, right?
By making sure we have the movement.
So you think, you know, when he jumps, when he falls, when he rolls, when he goes side to side, those animations get called up by the system. But again, it's all kind of a fake thing. It's all on top of this orb, right? Is a single point really what drives human movement? There's a little bit more kind of going on behind the scenes, even with how kind of human locomotion works. So let's look at some examples of this pill thing, and let's look at examples of kind of how this plays out in games. Okay, now I pulled up here a few. I kind of had to limit myself to some games where I could get a third-person perspective, just so we can see it together. Let me do some more driving here. Okay, here we go. This one is going to be Star Citizen, and this will just loop. But I want you to see the jiggling, the kind of awkwardness a little bit here and there. It's like, well, where does that come from, right? What causes that? The sliding of the feet, right? And again, it's because the point I'm trying to bring our attention to is that it's all fake, in the sense that there's nothing mechanical about these animations. It is just, again, kind of this thing that's draped on top, right, of this pill. And when you start seeing it that way, it makes sense. It can make sense what you're seeing. Same thing here with, I know this is something, it's called, a lot of this is inverse, a lot of these techniques involve inverse kinematics, but here it is, a lot of when we see this, often we see it to leg positions, right? This is kind of showing you. And the important thing here that I want trying to drive home is that the pill comes first, right? The pill is allowed to get on top of a box, is allowed to climb and move around. And then after the fact, once the pill's in position really quickly, everything else kind of triangulates and coordinates to where that is, and all the legs and stuff are made to kind of fall into place. But it's the pill first, animation second. Which you can see kind of like little things like this. He obviously didn't push off on his right leg to get up there, right? He just kind of floated up there, and then the leg took position. And again, kind of once we see it that way, this stuff starts making more sense too. If you look, it may be hard to maybe see it. It definitely you definitely feel it when you're playing the game. But what I want you to see is at the very beginning, that launch when he goes into a sprint is a super fat, like huge lunging motion, right? Really big. It doesn't really make much sense. Yeah, that right there. It's a huge kind of ice skating and a lunge, right? And you got to think like what drives that again is the pill. Have all this logic driven into the pill, these algorithms that, you know, how, the speed of acceleration, how fast it moves, the amount of ground resistance it feels, all this kind of stuff. And they just decided, hey, whenever the player is holding down shift and presses W, we want it to launch at this speed, right? And then it's up to the animators to kind of use this information to try and build an animation set that is kind of generic, right? It has to be able to apply to a bunch of different things because they can't make 50 million different, they can't cover all their bases, right? They have to kind of constrain themselves to a handful of animations that didn't get kind of applied across the board. And we'll see in cases like this, there are instances where it just doesn't make sense, right? And here's one more. This would be a first-person view. And I'm just showing the sliding. And I guess again, kind of maybe the underlying theme I'm trying to pull out here, or like the tone I'm trying to convey here. I'm not mad at this. I'm not calling him out as being stupid. Let's just say I'm not necessarily bashing it. I'm just bringing it to our attention so we can see that it's there and what is going into place, like what's taking place, right? And then we'll look a little bit later at maybe some ways we could maybe rectify this, right? Okay, another game. Check this out. This will be Grand Theft Auto. There's the pill again. Notice how when he's spinning, just like I showed in the montage, right? The character is not actually stepping anywhere. There's no mechanical thing that his legs are adding to this, his feet. The player's indicating he wants to spin the pill, and the pill spins, right? And that definitely drives home that single point. And this next one, yeah, I'm showing, again, kind of the foot position here. There's a question someone had that they put forward. They wanted to know, again, they want me, the reason I'm showing this a little bit, they wanted me to show this and kind of talk about why. So you see there are certain parts, it happens, you can get it happen in any of these games, where, let me see, freeze frame it when it gets there. Like, hold on, like here. The positions where the foot is floating in space, right? And they're like, well, hey, why does that happen? And again, if you think of it as, again, the pill, it's just all these, let's just call it resolution. You can call it resolution, whatever. Like the canister he's standing on, let's say, similar to what we just showed with the player. The game's understanding of it gets abstracted out to something more that's more rough around the edges, right? And the same thing's probably, I don't know for sure, right? I'm just guessing. But the same thing may be going here with that prop, with that asset, is the canister that we see, the can or whatever he's stepping on, right? Gets all these fine details of curves and contours and stuff. But maybe in the game's head, from the game's perspective, the engine's perspective, all those kind of nice, smooth, pixelated, defined edges get abstract, just get roughened up into be some just bigger box, right? So it's very possible that the foot is, from the game's logic, is actually that the width of that box is wider than what we visually see, right, in game terms. And it also comes down to, there's a lot of different things, right? I mean, it's a never-ending problem. If you remember calculus, this may be getting off topic. Remember calculus, where you're calculating the points under a curve, right? And you have you have to keep shooting down if you want more higher that whole math, the science of taking. I'm getting way off topic. I will shut up. Let's keep going. Let's keep going. Here we go. This next one will be. Yeah, and this starts tying into, for those of you who watched part 3, where it was like, hey, what the heck do we do with the mouse? This is kind of it also. And it's also part 2 with momentum and weapon handling. See? It actually was probably part 2 when I should, like the Michael Jordan thing I did, where he spins around super fast. Same thing here. I'm showing it in game now so you can see it. And again, it obviously looks out of place. It's obviously the person should not be able to do that. But it comes down to controls. What does the player expect? How does he control something like that, right? And we'll unpack that a bit more as it goes on too. So there's that. The next one I'm going to show, this one's more part 3 with the view. So check this out. And I apologize also, I'm looking at the resolution, it's kind of low. I was trying to save some space. Let's see, look. Look at this. Just like I showed with the spinning ballerina, right? Or the spinning ice skater. Right? It's the same thing here. You can do it in pretty much any game. And I guess what I'm trying to show is, you can look it up. I think it's the Euphoria engine, if I remember right. They used a really GTA 4 used a really big physics engine called the Euphoria engine. It's something called natural motion. Let me turn that down a little bit. You can look it up. You can look that up if you want to and see what I'm talking about. Very robust, right? But we see that while you can see a highlight reel of how it's like, whoa, these really, you know, to show off the capabilities of the physics engine and how it can look amazing. But yet, when it comes to actually implementing it into a game, the controls of that the player needs to have, the control mechanisms, or what kind of waters that stuff down, right? It puts a very again, kind of constraints on how much of that can get pulled in. And I don't know if you can maybe see it here. What I'm trying to show is, yeah, you can maybe see it, where the player character is obviously not responding while I'm spinning my mouse around, my view around really fast. The player character, the player model, is not trying to resolve every single bit of that. It's kind of like the game waits, right? Like once the mouse acceleration once the speed goes beyond a certain limit, it's kind of like, hey, just wait. Give the player a second. Let him figure out what he wants to do first, and then like let him stop, let him chill out a little bit and chill out somewhere. Then we'll let the player model kind of catch up, right? That's kind of one of the things I'm trying to show here as well. Here's another game. We'll be looking at the third person one. This is Control. And I'm having some fun here. You could really, again, I'm just trying to show. I know I'm laughing. It's not. I'm not making fun of it, but I'm just trying to show again. Once you know how to kind of game these systems a bit, you can really get them to do some really weird things. And again, if we think about this as a pill and how the animations are trying to kind of fill in the gaps, right? It makes sense why this is an issue, like why this happens. It's just kind of one of those facts of life right now. And you can kind of see on this one a little bit. I'm trying to see where it cuts off. Yeah, see how the... Okay, so I'm trying to speak in layman's terms here. So you have inverse kinematics, procedural animations, and stuff like this. You have that time in like Star Citizen, let's say, where the pill quits moving, and that's when the legs kind of find out where they are. The same thing has to happen here, and it just depends on how the programmers, when they determine those IK things come into play. Is it actively done, or does it have to reach the end of an animation loop? So you'll see animation cycles. So you see like here, when I'm going up the stairs, you see like the back leg, the back foot is trailing off into space, and same thing with the front foot. It's kind of sinking. It's pressing through the step, right? And that's the same reason there is because they're not letting that logic of where the feet need to go. That doesn't kick in until the animation cycle stops, until it completes an animation, and then it resolves. See, you can kind of see it settle there. That's one of the things I'm trying to show. So, okay, back to the question of that's kind of how games are doing it, right? And we kind of maybe have just somewhat of a more of an understanding of what's going on. But what drives human movement? Okay? Gravity. Gravity. And muscles. Nice little play on words there, if you know what I'm getting at. So gravity and muscles, right? A lot of stepping, a lot of movement comes to us yielding ourselves to gravity, and our body's actually falling and kind of catching ourselves as we fall through gravity, believe it or not. So we've got things like balance, right? You got loading and unloading weight between 2 feet, and as we'll look at that more. And this is, in addition to all this business, we also have other things like vector-related forces of actual motion. So you have momentum, you've got mass, you've got all this kind of stuff. I throw here. This is like center of gravity. So there's these certain positions you can make. You know, this is like a pole vaulter maybe, or like a gymnast. You have other things if you ever reaching down, like bending over to touch your toes and like pick something up. This is when also you'll find a human body can find itself when the center of gravity is actually outside of its form, right? And so what I can maybe show it here is if we take like the runner at the position here, maybe center of gravity is more like here, let's say, as the weight is, maybe it's like here. And as they run, this is going to talk about with the falling. The center of gravity, let's say, is trying to resolve, I'm just guesstimating, maybe something like here. He's leaning so far forward. His body it's kind of like a satellite, right? How it orbits Earth. The satellite's falling at the same rate that that hits the curve of the Earth. So that's why it always stays afloat, right? Kind of the same ideas going on here. And then once that momentum is kept, the person can straighten up a bit. And then again, they maybe lean forward for the finish line. And you have here, this is like they use this in racing, kind of a G-force calculator. So you can see the G-forces imparted on the driver, right? It's the same thing here. So we have kind of this, trying to see how I could unpack. I don't really want to stay on this too much, so I'm trying to think how I could. Okay, so if we say what drives it, let's say, what's behind all this, is everything's kind of resolving toward the center of gravity. That's where it's kind of wanting to go, right? But you can imagine that if we, again, go back to the game, what does that point, what point it doesn't need to, what's the point that needs to drive all this? The center of gravity may sound like a good, well, have it be the center of gravity. Well, but there are times when the center of gravity, as we're showing here, maybe some examples where maybe here it's getting out of the player model. That's not quite where the player's visually positioned, right? It might be where the heft and all that kind of the weight of everything is kind of going toward. But as far as a visual presentation, which if you think like a game, right, it's visual. Where are things visually rendered on the screen, right? So we can't quite rely on the center of gravity. So vector-related forces, and I'm talking about here kind of like, so again, this idea of what's driving it. Obviously cars have engines, right? The engines that, that drive it. I'm not trying to be cheeky, I'm just talking through an example here, right? So cars, you have your wheels, you have an engine that revs up and gives the force, right? To counteract gravity and friction, all that kind of stuff. And I'm going to stick with the car example for a bit more, because we look at this is coming to like player controls and input. Is if you look at a car, what makes it interesting is the way we interact with a car is very tactile, right? It's with the hands. You have a steering wheel that you grab and turn. You have a gear shifter that you go and you manipulate, right? We're used to having a hands-on experience with this stuff, so naturally, when it comes time, this makes it transfer really pretty well to games, right? Because there's kind of somewhat of a one-for-one matchup. The medium transfers over very, very easily, right? We're used to thinking about things like the engine revving and roaring, having to shift gears, right? About the tires losing the grip as they hit certain thresholds or something, right? All these, there are some underlying like mechanics that, because of kind of the detached nature of a car, we're used to having that in our, let's say, sphere of thought, right? Whereas if you think of human movement, when's the last time you physically tried to like grab your leg and move your leg, right? So aside from a dance-off, right? When's the last time you visualized your body as being kind of this like separate-ish type thing that you have to manipulate? Not so much, right? Because it's kind of like it's a movement is kind of let me change. It's kind of reflexive almost, right? It's kind of like, although weight shift and balance, even though they play a really big part in human movement, because we don't interact with them kind of through our arms, their role kind of drifts into our subconscious. That's just for discussion's sake, right? We're aware of them to some extent, right? But it's kind of more reflexive. So, I mean, and maybe a way to drive this home is you think about like the last time you, trying to think, let's say you sat down for too long and you stand up and your leg kind of a part of your leg fell asleep, right? And when you go and take a walk, right, take a step, oh, that feels really bizarre, right? And then all the feeling catches up and everything. But for that first little bit, it's kind of really disorienting, like, hey, whoa, what's going on, right? Same thing if you kind of like miss a step in a stairwell. You ever done that? Where you're going up and down and you think there's one more step, but there's not, or there is, you know, and you kind of like do that jerky type motion. That's kind of what I'm tying into here. And not to get too weird if you think of it as trauma type things, injuries. That happens oftentimes too. People will have some horrific thing happen, have some trauma to their body, physical things. And just, again, by kind of just the subconscious, everything, all the subconscious stuff is just, okay, I need to move. And they try to move, and they try to move. And for all their awareness, they kind of think, I should be moving. And it takes a while to catch up. Well, hold on. Why isn't my arm moving? Or why isn't my leg moving? Or why isn't my... And that's when they realize, oh no, something horrific just happened, or, you know, whatever. Not to get too gruesome with that. So let's keep going here. So, that said, once we step into the realm of combatives, so all that said about everything kind of drifting in the background, once we step into the world of combatives on any level, I mean, this could be stand-up fighting, ground fighting, all this kind of stuff. Once you step into combatives, footwork and controlling center of gravity actually becomes a lot more paramount. We become more aware of it, right? Because locomotion of the human body can be quite involved. Let me go to this little, bring up another thing for us. Un momento, por favor. Okay.
With a Sur Pro pretty safely.
Let me turn down this.
Down. Down.
So what I'm showing here is, it's surprisingly hard to get 360-degree footage. So I'm trying to have to be a little. I didn't have much to choose from here. What I'm trying to show here are just kind of the complications of human movement, right?
Speed reload. Check 6. Up.
Mm-hmm.
Good job. Now relax.
And we'll see, like, this is the... From a crouch, I had someone want to talk about, like, moving from a crouch. That's a transition. I've done that many times myself. That's very common when you're working from your knees, right? It's kind of a rotational, again, like that. That's the motion right there, right? But I want you to see, kind of again, it's the position of the body is kind of what dictates. It has a big factor on dictates how quickly a person can do something, right?
Stretch left. Stretch right.
And we can disagree, and I'm not using this as an example. Let's say as like a model. There's different ways of approaching these types of. I don't agree with everything this is showing here, but it doesn't really matter. There's different strokes for different folks, and that's okay. You have to find what works for you, right?
Speed reload.
Let's go back to here. Okay, so the good news is that human locomotion, for the most part, has a fairly consistent logic to it, right? And I'll show this some more hands-on here. But for example, to lift the right foot, we must first remove our weight from it, right? Placing our weight on our left foot, right? So determining which foot is available then kind of comes down to the weight placement and or the direction of travel of the weight, right? Let's pull up another example here. 58. Yeah. Okay, check this out. And this is just I'm trying to just crudely represent this, right? So the way, in order to pick up that right foot, sorry, my camera's off. Okay, here we go. So what I'm trying to show here is kind of a crude representation of how this give us a visual look at. The green dots, let's just call it the center of gravity, the weight. The ring is kind of like the limit of body position or limit of the weight. So if you want to sidestep to the right, you have to first move the weight off to the left and then go to the right, and then it lands, and then it kind of recenters, right? Now I'm not sure I'm going to show it on this one. It's kind of a little bit maybe too off topic. There are other ways of stepping and moving, believe it or not, that keep the center of gravity more centered. But that's kind of going outside. I might show it just for fun, but it kind of goes outside the scope of this film. So again, I kind of have this here just to kind of, hopefully it'll make sense what I'm saying. It's hard for me to animate it, but it's just, you know, if you want to pick up this left foot, you gotta scooch this over to the right, and then you can pick it up and step it, right? And then as this step is happening, this also causes depending on what you're doing, where your hips are, right? Are you just raising your foot up? Once the foot hits, you can then transfer your weight over to it, and kind of this kind of starts shifting. Let's say it might get bigger or smaller. Oops, but that's kind of the ideas I'm just trying to show here. This could be, sorry. This is, I don't know if it really comes into play. This is kind of be the hips. You can kind of, again, if you think of it as how the hips can rock and shift, right? And then you have shoulders independent of this kind of stuff, right? A little bit, maybe too much detail, but again, just ideas to kind of get us thinking in the right terms, maybe. Now, all that's cool, but so what, right? What the heck? Who cares? Well, the thing I think is interesting here would be, what if the single point logic, instead of it being a single point, the single pill that drives everything, what if instead it were the body's positioning was derived from 2 points? Okay, so that's kind of what I'm showing here. Instead of having one pill, like we had up above, right? What if the feet, the position of the feet are what become important, and then the body position is interpreted based on where the feet are, right? And this gets into a topic that's pretty big. It's called procedural animations. And again, if you think of it as kind of the language, what does that mean, right? You have keyframed. And procedural. Think of the word procedural, right? There's a certain procedure it goes through. It can kind of like blend and fill in gaps kind of on the fly based off of certain positions, right? So you have constraints. This is where inverse kinematic kind of come into play as a big thing of how the engine makes sense of these procedure animations. You can have the limits of the range of motion, right? When something gets articulated too much, right, then something else gets pulled in, then something else gets pulled in, right? You can think of how all these, that's part of like building up the skeletal structure in the rigging, and unfortunately Unity has a lot of this stuff built into kind of its humanoid animations. I mean, it has some really cool stuff. So the idea here would be that the player would indicate the direction of travel, right? And the manner in which it gets, which it is achieved. Let me switch. And the manner in which that motion is achieved then gets kind of carried out, right? So, like I was saying earlier, we kind of started to dip our toes in here to procedure animations. Though I'm kind of thinking in a slightly different direction. The overgrowth guy we saw earlier, where we had the orb and then the bunny and the animated bunny, he kind of had it to where the pill drove everything, and then he had an animation system that was procedurally done more or less as that facade, right? I'm kind of going the different way, putting the cart before the horse, not going that way, but putting the horse before the cart, right? To where, hey, what really drives this stuff is the positioning of the feet, right? And the locomotion and the center of gravity and all this kind of stuff, right? So what I'm going to show next is something that really piqued my interest. Believe it or not, the guy that when I found his little video last night, I was like, oh, cool, this shows what I'm trying to say. He actually references this. You'll see it in his video, but it's a game called Rainworld. I want to show it here. Let me pull it up. Give me a segundo.
So, procedural animation is an important part of Rainworld. And procedural animation, as I will talk about it today, is basically animation that does not happen by drawing.
So, and I'll put a link to this video too in the bottom so we can see it. This is a very interesting, it was a really cool game. I got it right when it came out. It's a really cool game. how the animations come into play.
Here we have the rain
Um,
here.
and
These guys are the lizard, and that's sort of like the most reoccurring antagonist.
you can see kind of how fluid, and there aren't many things that are like we'd see as being canned, right? It's all kind of this fluid, kind of
And this one right here is
conforming
Scavenger. It's
to
sort
the
of
environment
tool of
type
the
thing, right?
Rainworld, AI, and it's supposed to be equal to the
Those
player
guys are really
character in
cool.
every way. As far as movement, it can use tools. It's as you can see, it's perfectly comfortable on poles.
I'll just let this
or
play
on
out. I might talk every now and then, but just let it play out.
When it comes to the actual, like,
And this is kind of showing some of what's going on behind the scenes, right? You have the bones, and then you have how it's determining where it can go. It has ideas of where it would like to go, and then it kind of surveys its environment to see what is kind of available, and then it makes decisions on that.
Send the tentacle over there. So procedural animation is an important part of
So pretty cool, huh? So the interesting part of something like that, and it came up in Rainworld a few times, is rather than having a game become kind of this test of who can kind of game or find the gimmicks in kind of this sliding puck mechanic, right? If we go back to the pill, right? The acceleration, the maximum speed, all this kind of stuff. Rather than having that be kind of who can use those to their advantage the most, the method and means of approach would become more important. How are the legs right now? Well, because your legs were crossed, I'm just pulling out examples here, because you're on your left foot, your character had to take his right step first and then go. A little bit of a delay, right? Because your guy was running super fast, it's not just generic, he needs to, as the pill slows down, maybe the footwork comes into play and how quickly he's able to, again, pivot, find that grounding and pivot, right? If you start, again, think of it as an animation as being a mechanical aspect of gameplay, it really starts becoming an interesting deal. And you might say, well, but what, but no, that's just too much. It's going too far, right? Who would want that? And I would say maybe if you look at, there's some other, I didn't pull them up here, but there's some games like I'm thinking of like a Human Fall Flat. There are some games out there that went kind of procedural, kind of ragdollish type stuff, like Full Bore. I'm thinking of like Human Fall Flat, I think was one, where you've got kind of these amorphous, kind of blobby type characters, right? Very cartoonish, over the top, and the game is kind of navigating these dudes around these environments, right? And that becomes the focus of the game because they're so kind of unruly and so stupid. It's like, well, this is it. It takes you forever just to grab a stupid lever and pull it down, or to get in. That's not what I'm trying to go for. I'm trying to say, is there kind of a happy medium where, again, we could say for footwork, is that one of the missing links that's kind of holding a lot of things back, right? As in terms of player movement, the types of situations that are highlighted in the game, and the type of tension that comes about. Well, why would I want to take smaller steps? Why would I want to take, well, if you have the locomotive aspect of the mechanics of those steps, well, you can then start seeing, that makes sense because the person's in more control of the center of gravity. So you could be the guy that kind of runs out like a bat out of hell, right, and just not even caring, but you're going to have ramifications for that, right? Whereas the guy who plays everything's more close to his chest, more ready to shoot, right? Stable platform, and just kind of takes things, again, is patient and takes things in little bitty snapshots to be ready, versus a guy who's just blowing and going, no care in the world, right? It may seem like at first blush that, don't you want to keep moving? It's like in some cases, yes. Depends on what's going on. The environment dictates a lot of that stuff. But the faster you go, you are definitely sacrificing reaction times and awareness, right? And just the, controlling the overall bulk and heft of your person, right? Which, again, I guess what I'm trying to say is, it may not sound like much, right? But it depends on what a game wants to focus on. I'm kind of making it akin to, like, if you go back to the driving example, a racing game. It's kind of like if a racing game were to have something that kind of oh, RPMs, who cares, right? Acceleration, nah, who cares, right? And they just kind of make up their own rules as they go, and it becomes this really fast, wheel slippage and stuff, all wear and tear on the, nah, who cares, right? You start seeing the gameplay. It is all those decisions are reflected in the gameplay, and you're going to end up with something that is like, well, what is this? Is it a racing game? Well, yeah, but what kind of racing game, right? And you start seeing, is it like again, it starts being so far removed from reality. It's trying to run their own. They have their own little separate context, or having to kind of flesh out and justify to the player and orient the player to and everything. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is, it's possible that for so long we've kind of been just overexposed to kind of this dumbed down view of player movement, human movement, right? And that, again, it's so far out of the realm of player perspectives, they wouldn't even know it if it hit them straight in the face, right? And that's so. Let's keep going. I have a little. Sorry, I thought that was my last line. Okay, so what does it mean to control? Yeah, this is where it becomes cool. Now, we can talk about this all day long. We can say, oh, yeah, that sounds great. I'm starting to talk about some of from an analyst analyzing this. Let's look at some weaknesses, right? The biggest one I can think of is, what does it mean to control a player character then? Because if you think of a keyboard with inputs, a key or a button, right? It's on or it's off. That's it. It's two states. It's not like it's a joystick where you have a little bit on, a little bit off, right? There's no in between. It's on or it's off. And that kind of binary, just strict thing is going to introduce some very weird, or not weird, just interesting situations, right? So let's look at an example here. Let me pull this up again. Hopefully this works. Should be number 60. Yeah, here we go. Check this out.
In the air. Very important that pitchers do not have tension in their body.
I want you to see this in terms of momentum and, again, just kind of force and movement, right? If I were to ask the pitcher to stop throwing right here, would he be able to? Probably so. If you say, whoa, stop, he'd probably be able to stop, right? If you ask him right here, whoa, stop, he'd probably be able to stop. Whoa, here, might be able to stop. He started getting close, right? But when he comes to here, whoa, stop throwing. Maybe. When it comes to here, no way. He is so close to reaching that final motion, right? Think of biomechanics and all that kind of stuff. It's too late. Things are already going. So, in a similar, and I'll kind of show this with the other model here, but in a similar way, picture this as a player's holding a key. Pitch the ball, holding the pitch key. And then I let go of the pitch key. Say, let's go right here. And, well, crap, the character throws it, right? Here it goes. Oh, sorry. Sucks to be you. He threw it, right? From a player perspective, I've referenced this before, this notion of a feedback loop, right? The feedback loop for the player is actually very important, and it's one of those things you kind of have to really be careful how you kind of play with it and how you introduce it to the player, because if you have that, the player lets go, I don't want to throw it, right? Too late, he threw it. The player could really be like, oh, stupid game, I said I wanted to quit throwing it, right? And it's like, dude, there's no way you'd be able to not throw it, right? And it's the same thing here if we go back to the thing of stepping, right? So let me see if I can, again, I apologize for being crude with this animation. So here I go, I'll kind of go through it. I drift my weight, I go, and here comes my foot, ba-boof, right? And again, picture this kind of drifting as it goes, right? But if the player, let's just pretend this foot is still up in the air. I haven't planted it yet. When the player lets go of W right now, I let go. I don't want to go forward. I change my mind. The trick then is, what does the game decide to do? Does it say, hey, well, okay, we'll stop, but we'll stop with the continuation of what was previously going on. So we're going to let this resolve and find the midpoint. We're going to let this kind of come and drift, and your guy will stop at, I don't want to be too exact here, but just to drive it home, we'll stop something like this. Will be a position he assumes with his feet, right? Or if the player lets go, do we say, well, that foot, it's in the air, per the procedural keyframe logic, well, the motion it's trying to go is a little bit further, so it's going to take that step further, and then even though he let go, well, we're going to go ahead and let him reach, let's say, a stopping pose, a neutral pose, up here, right? Is that what it determines? Or if we go another step forward, maybe I can undo this. Might be an easy way. There we go. Now we're cooking. Or do we say it like this? He offsets his weight. He starts to take a step. He hasn't put his foot down yet, and he lets go of W. Oh, wait. Okay, the player means to kind of backpedal and come back to where he was before, right? And if you picture this, it was hard for me to pull up. I couldn't really pull up a way to show this, but I want you to keep in mind here the type of role that the player camera plays in all this as far as feedback goes. So when the weight is shifted, the player needs to know something's going on. The advantage of a third-person perspective on all this is when Nico or whatever characters that you're seeing in third person, whenever they're resolving their cool physical things, right? Because it's a third-person perspective, we can see what's happening, and it can help us make sense. It makes sense. It helps the whole thing make sense to us, right? There was an old mod. I don't think it was GTA 4 or GTA 5. I think it was GTA 4 that I played a long, long time ago. That kind of factored into first. It kind of built in a first-person animation, a first-person perspective, just for fun to see what it would play out. And it's like, whoa, cool, GTA 4 in first person. Until you realize that there's a lot of these kind of cues that are missing from the game, right? These feedback cues, these motion cues that give the player an idea of what's happening. So, for example, you turn and do something, and you try to maybe pull up your gun or something, and it's like it takes a while. And from a gameplay, from a user feedback perspective, it was kind of like a nightmare. You didn't know, well, what the heck's going on, right? I don't know why he's falling. There's another game, another thing about it called Sub Rosa. Uses a lot of kind of a physical. I'm not really advocating for this necessarily, but I'm just saying this again, trying to draw two clear depictions, right? The pill versus these more physical-based things. Sub Rosa would be like way on this end, maybe somewhere in the middle. But the Sub Rosa thing would be. That's a common complaint people have, is the creator had to do a lot of time to see how does he kind of build in these visual cues to give the player a sense of reference as to what's happening. So, for example, there'd be a time, exaggerated example, you'd sit there and like, why isn't my guy doing something? And then you'd change to the third-person perspective, and you'd see that, oh, well, that makes sense. I didn't realize it. He had fallen over. He tripped over a curb, or he got bumped by something and fell over. And while I'm sitting here trying to pull my gun up and shoot, well, the player was busy picking himself up and dusting himself off, and then it comes, right? So, does it conform when a player has an analog control, on or off? Does it conform to the dying path, kind of like a car hitting the brakes, and it finishes that? Or does it conform to kind of like a back pedal, where he goes and then reclaims, tries to get back to the point where the character let go? And let me see. I think that's and that's. I don't have much of an outro for this, but I just want to say it's a big topic, right? And I hope you can start seeing how each of these segments are kind of like variations on a theme, right? What I'm trying to kind of poke holes at, just for fun and just for kind of an understanding and an interest, is this notion that we get as gamers, right? This game is so realistic. I'm kind of trying to start poking holes in that for us to see that we're kind of out of touch. For a lot of people, it's easy to be out of touch in that and think it's so realistic when really there's a lot of basic fundamental aspects that are kind of lacking and kind of glossed over. Some for the better, and maybe some for the worse, right? But I think it's a very interesting discussion to kind of get started. And I think just as now that I'm thinking about it, just as an outro, give me a second. I think somebody wanted to see this, so I'll show. This will be mini montage part 2, a little short one. I wanted to kind of show an idea of. Sorry, I'm getting good things. So here we go. This is how this plays out. The same music, yes. We're in the island, baby. So there's the quote wrong way, right? How most people walk. And I had a lot of stuff I had to cut from this. It was just getting way too long. I had a bunch of stuff I had to cut from this. And what I was showing, again, you can play with this as an idea yourself if you want to. But it depends on what your background is, right? A lot of the people I learned from and trained with extensively had a different application, right? You have people who are, depending on what the role is, right? You'd have, if it's trying to think of ways I can say this without being disparaging. I'm just talking out loud, right? If you have an idea where it's kind of a numbers game, right? Where you're going in as teams, right? Where you can commit, you have the luxury of committing to a path, and you have people that will kind of fill in the gaps behind you that work as a team, right? You can get away with kind of over-committing, right? And also that forward momentum and stuff, that sense of pressure, and aggression can play to your advantage in a big way. From the outside looking in, if you watch these types, and you see I see this a lot in competition shooting, which is another reason why I kind of quit doing it. Or I do it, I use it in a different way today than I did before. From the outside looking in, you can see what's happening. You can see the movement. You can see how it progresses. You can see that, man, clearly that guy's engaged in something, right? Well, there's a whole school of thought that I kind of learned from for a long time, and it's really cool. Is they came from like a more, it's called a bodyguard perspective, whereas there's a concept of the gray man, let's say that, where the gray man is something where pictured like as a neutral, right? There are certain ways, and what you're looking at here is, again, think of bodyguarding. You want to be able to deal with something in a way that is very kind of covert, right? I don't mean this in like an over-the-top Splinter Cell type way. I mean it in a very real way. There are certain methodologies and ways of approaching things that you kind of take it and flip it on its head. And one of the biggest ones of that is it's called modes of movement, right? And the way you play with this is, and you can do this yourself, it's very easy to do. It's one of those things that's very simple to understand as a concept. It's hard to do in practice unless you kind of have someone there with you to kind of see it and call it out. I might even release this as another video to this, but what I'm trying to show, what I'm trying to say here is, there's ways, center of gravity. Once you commit your center of gravity to a certain trajectory, there's a lot that takes a lot more muscle and a lot more like effort to change directions, right? You put on the gas to really put on the brakes, right? There's a lot of more shifting and kind of lumbering type aspect to this. Whereas you can hide a lot of things if you keep it neutral. If you work on keeping your center of gravity neutral, which is what I was kind of doing there on that step. And this is very, very good when you need to change directions very quickly, right? Whether it's responding to an impulse, responding to something you receive, right? Or just in general, being able to move. And it's very interesting. You can play with this. It's one of those fun things we did, force on force, a lot of things like that, where moving through crowds, getting to kind of a VIP type thing and controlling the situation. It's very different when you start looking at being gray, right? There's a different mentality, a different way of combatives starts entering into the game. And it's not something that's taught very, very, very. I'm not saying this as a way to, I'm not trying to pump myself up or anything. I'm just saying there's a whole side of this that I started going into. I tried to whittle it down, and I said I just can't go. There's too far off topic. Because I'm thinking from a gameplay sense, I think what players are most used to seeing are these more over-the-top aggressive stances and posturings and modes of movement, right? So it might be good to approach it from more of the lazy is not the right word, but again, just more of the shifting center of gravity type mode of walking versus the neutral gray man way of approaching things. So anyway, I'm shutting this up. I'm done. This has been fun. I hope you enjoyed the topic. I've really enjoyed it. Hope you can see how these are going to start playing off of each other in a big way. And we'll see where this takes us next. If there's something you'd like to dive into, if there's like something you feel like I missed, something you'd like for me to go into more, let me know, right? I kind of waiting to see what sticks out to me with certain games, with certain situations I experience, certain things that go with my own personal training, how it relates to games, or even if I go from gaming, if I go the other way, from gaming to the real world. That's how I'm kind of picking up these things, but hey, I'm always open to suggestions from you guys. So thanks for watching, and catch you guys next time. Adios.